stuff for high school students, as all of you are about to do. So this is really awesome to be able to come back now as a professional and speak to you about admissions, about mentoring students. Your role is very important in helping to guide these students through the process. It's very complicated. It can feel complicated. It can feel very convoluted, very difficult, because there's so much information that these students have access to and are trying to process as they make their way to college. So what you do, how you impact what they're doing is very important. So today, I'm just going to give you the perspective from admissions. So giving you some insight. Quick overview of the agenda. So talking briefly about the college search, just sort of some things to think about. And a lot of this information is in the packet that they handed out. It's all very nicely organized. I would definitely read through all of that. Some great information there. Talking about the different types of colleges to consider as you're working with your students. Testing requirements, they will vary by institution. Essays, so really talk about how do we evaluate the essay, what are we reading for when we're looking at these applications and we're in the midnight hour reading our 500th essay of the reading season. What are things that we are considering when we're really thinking about. The different decision plans, this is definitely a point where students can get confused, because there's early action, there's restricted early action, there's early decision, there's regular decision, there's rolling admission, binding, non-binding. So I'll talk through that so that you can all be aware, so that you can help them through that and mentor them through that process. And then lastly, touching on financial aid, the importance of financing for education. So the college search, really things to think about as you're working with your students is help them to develop the ideal college before they start applying or start picking out the exact colleges that they're going to be applying to. So the idea of what do I want in my undergraduate education? What am I looking for? What kind of location do I want to be in? What size of university do I want to attend? Do I want to go to a liberal arts college? Do I want one that is more specific, a more technical school? What are my interests? Do they offer the major that I'm interested in? Oftentimes when I go to college fairs, when I do outreach, students are asking about majors that we do not offer. And so it's very quick to say, actually we don't offer that. You might be interested in looking at another university. So it's definitely important for students to have that in mind, and also including schools across selectivity ranges. Students should not only be applying to the top 10 colleges on the U.S. News Magazine, whatever lists they create. Often those top 10 colleges have less than a 10% admit rate. That is very difficult. That could be considered a reach school for pretty much any student. Stanford does fall among that category. This past year we admitted just below 6% of our freshman applicants. So we get large numbers. We got nearly 39,000 and admitted 2,210. And our peer institutions on the East Coast, all throughout, they have similar admissions rates. So really, the student wants to understand what are the different types of schools that are out there, what are schools that will meet the needs that I'm looking for in my undergraduate education, and applying across the different ranges. You don't want to set yourself up for failure. We hear sad stories of that all the time, where students only apply to Stanford, Harvard, MIT, Princeton, Yale, very low admit rates, and it didn't work out in their favor. And so they're forced to take a gap year and figure out sort of their next steps. So you really want to set them up for success with that. And also understanding why the student's interested in this school. Why are you interested in a particular school? That's sort of a battle that we constantly fight as admission officers when we're talking to students. Really understand why they're interested in it. There's some great tips in your packets for sort of narrowing down schools, questions to think about, ideas to touch on as you're creating that college list. But really creating the ideal college, what you expect, what you want to get out of your undergraduate education, and then helping your students sort of sift through that, all the different options that are available for them. So there are a number of different types of colleges that a student can apply to. And in your packet, all of these different types are pretty detailed in there, so I'm just going to touch on them briefly. So community colleges, two-year universities that act as feeders into four-year institutions, oftentimes for students. So these could be great options for students just depending on their preparedness to attend college. So really it's working with the student to help them think through that, help them also stretch. You don't want to say that, oh, I only think you can go to community college first, but that could be an option for them depending on their life path, their trajectory, their preparedness to apply for college. So I highlighted the California state systems since we are in California and are working with California residents. So just things to think about. California State University, there's 23 campuses. They admit about the top 3% of high school students who have met their CSU minimums. So it's important when students are looking at different colleges to understand what are the requirements of that university. Some schools have very specific requirements that you need to meet in order to even sort of be in the running for being a potential admitted student for that university. Or other students are going to be other universities are going to be a little bit more vague about that. And the deadlines. Deadlines will make or break someone's ability to apply to a university. Oh, sorry, my husband. So the deadlines are going to be very important. I would say Excel is your friend, especially as you're working through all the different types of applications, the different decision deadlines that one can apply to, the different application periods. So as I note here, and that's in your packet, the CSU system, their enrollment or application sort of period is October 1 through November 30th. So the student needs to apply during that time frame. They don't want to be late. A day late is a day late, and they've missed the application process. I know for us, we get that all the time. A day late, January 2nd, is too late to apply to us. So you really want to make sure that students are paying attention to deadlines. So the University of California, 9 campuses, a little bit more selectivity, top 12.5%, and as many of you may know, they have the A through G requirements. So these are very set requirements that students need to attain at bare minimum to really be considered a contender for one of the seats in their classes. Now, oftentimes, they're not just looking for the minimum, right? There's going to be students who are going above that minimum, but they do have specified A through G requirements that a student will need to have in order to apply, and their application enrollment deadline is November 1 through the 30th, so there's a month-long period for that. And then there's private colleges and universities. Bit of a different process, so I'll talk about the holistic review process. Application timelines are going to be sort of all over, and the committee process that we have. So with the holistic review, so Stanford falls into this last category. Holistic review, when we go to evaluate an application, we're looking at the entirety of a student's file. So all the different aspects that make up a student's file, understanding them in the context of their school, of their background, of their family, of where they are, of the opportunities available to them, how they've engaged those different opportunities. We're not comparing students across different schools. Often a question that we get, well, I go to this school down the street and it has so many AP programs, but my friend goes to this other school and they have a ton more than me. Am I at a disadvantage? And no, because we're looking at the student within their context. We're trying to see how have you engaged your particular program, what your school offers, and how are you challenging yourself and how are you doing within those challenges. So every part of the application matters. The first part, and the thing that we're going to first is going to be that academic piece. So understanding, will you be prepared to engage in the classroom setting here at Stanford in particular, and university when they're undergoing a holistic review? They're trying to understand, is the student prepared? Can they hit the ground running? Are they going to struggle in the classes? How will they fare here at the university? So with that, we're looking at 2 key aspects. We have the testing and the transcript. So the transcript is sort of of the 2 academic pieces, it's the more important of the piece because your transcript shows 4 years of work, whereas a test shows maybe 4 hours of work. So when we're going to evaluate those pieces of the application, we're going to have that in mind. And this is often the case at many of our peer institutions and many institutions that have holistic reviews. It's together. It's looking at your testing, looking at your high school transcript. How prepared have you come? How have you done? Will you be successful here at Stanford? So that's, your transcripts, looking at core academic subjects. So oftentimes the different requirements of other universities are the classes that we're looking at. So we're looking at math, science, social studies, foreign language, and English courses. Oftentimes students will engage these classes all 4 years of high school. They're going to be taking higher level opportunities for this. So if the student is in a school that offers APs, that offers IBs, that offers honors classes, at Stanford we would expect to see some of that within their program. And at many universities they're going to want to see that rigor in their academic program because that's what we're looking at. We're looking at how have you done, what was the rigor of your program. Stanford's a bit unique in that we actually look at 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. We don't consider 9th grade in our evaluation process. But most universities do, so You don't want to say that it's completely written off. Usually the habits that students have developed in their 9th grade year carry forward into their senior year anyways, but when we are looking at a student's profile or transcript, we're looking at those last 3 years of their high school trajectory. And trajectories are things that we're looking at. Is a student making upward progress? Have they gotten better every year, and really that senior year they sort of find their swan song and they fully blossom and they're really strong? Maybe they've just been steady all 4 years, or all 3 years in our case, and they've just had a very solid performance. Downward trends probably aren't good, so if you're working with your seniors and you start to see a downward trend to motivate them to keep going, we understand it's your final year of high school, but you're almost done. So they definitely don't want to fall off the bandwagon as far as doing that. And very inconsistent transcripts are also difficult to sort of really gauge how a student's doing if it's up, down, all over the place. What I like to call an EKG trend, where you just don't know where the student's going. In any of their classes, it's definitely, a bit difficult to understand how have they done, how are they going to perform here. So in addition to that, again, like I mentioned, there's going to be your testing requirements, and I'll go into detail with that, but often it's either the SAT or the ACT with writing are going to be required. Other testing, supplemental tests, may or may not be required, just depending on the university. And then again, with this holistic review, every part matters. So there's your academic piece, that's sort of the first place we go. At Stanford, the vast majority of students who apply, over 80% I would estimate, are academically qualified. If you're just looking at how they've performed in the classroom, how they've performed in their testing. And that's why holistic review is important, because there's letters of recommendation that we're going to be evaluating and trying to understand how the student has impacted their classroom community, how they've engaged with their teachers, how they engage with learning. That's important to us because it helps us understand how they can engage here at Stanford. How are they going to make an impact in the classroom? Extracurricular activities, what are they doing? How do they spend their time outside of the classroom? How do they engage? Are they making an impact? Are they leading groups? Or does their impact make a difference in what they're doing? And extracurriculars can be traditional, so maybe you're on a sports team, you're in a band, you do drama, dance, anything at school, but it can also be sort of non-traditional. Maybe the student has to work. Maybe the student has significant family responsibilities that they're taking care of outside of school hours, but that's where their time goes. All of that information is important. Again, it goes back to context. So if you have to work, having sort of those traditional extracurriculars are not necessarily going to be there, but working is your extracurricular. That is how the student has spent their time. So when you talk to students and they're saying, oh, I'm not in this club or that club, but I work, that's something that they would want to put on their application in that spot for us to understand, again, their context. What are you doing outside the classroom? We don't have a preference for what it is, but really just want to see that you're engaged, that you're making an impact, in that your involvement matters. And then, so again, the last piece, which I'll touch on more extensively in a moment, are going to be the essays, the voice of the student, very important in our process. Application timelines will vary by school. For Stanford, we have a November 1 restricted early action deadline, or a regular decision January 1st deadline. And again, making sure that you hit the deadline on the head. Do a couple days before, because the common application always gives trouble on the day that your application is due, and you don't want to fall into any of that trouble. And then a committee process. So at Stanford, we employ a committee process. So we have admission officers like myself who read applications by territory, but then we take all of our applicants to committee and we discuss them, and it's by committee vote consensus by which we determine who our admitted students are going to be. So testing, I did touch on this already a little bit, but key testing, either the SAT or the ACT, often with writing. The student will want to confirm and check. At Stanford, we do require the writing portion if the student does take the ACT. We don't have a preference for either of the two tests, and really it's up to the student to take the one that they feel best prepared for, which they feel they can do the best on. There are differences between the two tests, so definitely look those up. That could help the students sort of determine where they would like to take the test. And there's a number of free resources on the testing websites that students can get access to in their school libraries. I know just a bunch of different ways that they can prepare for the test without necessarily having to take a very expensive test prep course. So they definitely want to spend time doing that. So subject tests, or the SAT-2s, as many of you know, they're not required at Stanford in particular, but they are recommended. There are are schools that do require them, depending on if you're applying to a certain program. So definitely look at where you can find synergy. If there are schools that require certain SAT-2 subject tests, take those ones and submit them to the other schools that say they don't have a preference, like Stanford, for what you take, but if you do take them, we'd like to see those grades, see those results, because it just adds to your overall academic profile. And so in that way, they're not having to take 10 million tests at one time. We definitely discourage test taking from becoming an extracurricular activity, because there are other things that one can be doing with their time. And then the AP and the IB test, this oftentimes is going to be self-reported on the application of the students filling out. So they're not necessarily having to submit official reports for these tests until they matriculate to a school and potentially want to gain credit or placement credit for any particular subject area. So they'll self-report. For Stanford, they self-report on the common application, and we just take that into consideration with everything else of their academic profile that we're evaluating. And I was going to say, so for the AP IB, we don't have a preference, they're not required in any way, so oftentimes students will have them, because many students take APs, they have those tests, but if they don't have them, it's not a disadvantage either. And also with the subject tests, they're not required, they are recommended. The vast majority of our students will submit about 2 tests to us, because they're often having to take them for other places. Really, it's a way to show additional proficiency and ability in a particular subject area. So things like language or in-depth science or math or whatever your sort of strength is, students can take tests in those areas and submit them to us. So the essay. This is a very important piece of the application for universities that require essays, such as Stanford. So Stanford students fill out 5 different essays. There are 2 on the Common App, 3 additional short essays on our Stanford supplement, as well as short popcorn answers that are things like, what's your favorite book? What are movies that you enjoy? How did you spend your last 2 summers? Many of you probably remember all of this. 5 words to describe yourself. And really the essay is the opportunity for the student to share their voice. What is your perspective? What do you care about? What excites you in learning? So at Stanford Learner Evaluating Applications, we really look for a thing we call intellectual vitality. Is the student excited to learn? Are they excited by ideas? Do they have unique perspectives, thoughts? Really having your own voice. We often get questions of what's the best essay to write? Well, it's really not the topic that the student writes about, but how they approach the topic, how they engage the topic. Is this essay engaging? If it's boring for them to write, it's probably boring to read. And so they want to think about that as they're writing their essays. On here I just write, how does it make the student sound? Are they curious? Are they smart? Are they engaged? Are they excited about a particular idea? It's their opportunity to speak directly to the admission officer. We do read these essays, contrary to popular belief. If we didn't, our jobs would go much faster and we wouldn't be spending half the year evaluating applications. So it really is our opportunity to learn about them, because we're not sitting down with them. We often don't have interviews for our students. And so the essays are the one part where the student has full control during the process, because your testing is done, you've already sat, you're testing, you're just submitting your results. Your transcript is pretty much done at this point. You're in your senior year, everything that's happened, can't really change anything with that. Your extracurriculars, you're already in progress, right? It's stuff that you've been doing throughout the years and that you've been involved with over time. But your essays are in the moment. It's something that you're continually working on, something that you continually improve. And so you want to encourage them to take the time to be reflective, take the time to think deeply about the questions that they're answering, take the time to bring in their own perspective. There is no right way to write an essay. Grammatically correct, I guess, would be a right way to write your essay. Don't confuse essays with sort of text lingo and email short abbreviations, full spellings of words and all that stuff. Sort of common sense, but I like to just reiterate because that gets lost sometimes. But really taking the time to write them, think about them, step away, come back, edit them. Don't edit out their voice though. They do want to have their own perspective. It shouldn't sound like a cookie cutter. It shouldn't sound like everybody else's essay. One key advice that I give is that if you dropped your essay on the floor and your best friend or your mom or someone who knew you very well, could they pick it up and say that this was written by you? if so, then you're doing a good job. Then that's a better indicator, a better way for us to be able to get to learn about that student through their essay. But if it could be applied to any other person, anyone else, then it's really not giving us unique insight into that particular student. So you definitely want them to sit down to take the time to write that. Often the essays are released well in advance, so as soon as Common Application goes live, Stanford's application goes live. So that's August 1st. Our first deadline isn't until November 1st if they're applying restricted early action, or they have all the way until January 1st. So there's time for students to write these different essays that they're going to be required to write for all the different universities that they're applying to. And some universities don't even have essays, but for the ones that do, it is very important to take the time to write them and to really think them through. So the different decision plans, I kind of touched on this. As you can see, I have 5 different ones listed here. So it's important to understand what they all mean. So early action, does anybody know what early action means?
You apply like earlier than the regular admission deadline, but if you get in, you're not bound to go there.
Wonderful, yes. So early action, you apply early, it's an earlier timeline, you get an earlier review. It's the same process as applying regular to any particular school, but you get your decision sooner. And it's non-binding, as you said. So you're not bound, you're not committing to go to that school. If you're applying early action, even if you were to be admitted, you have until their enrollment deadline, which is usually May 1st for all universities, to let them know whether or not you want to attend. So restricted early action, that's Stanford's program. What does that mean?
You can only apply to one school.
Yes. So restricted early action, you can only apply to one school under their early action program. You can apply to as many other schools under their regular decision program. There are some exceptions for scholarship programs that are early action but non-binding at public universities. And any university who has a restricted early action program will have any exceptions that they do have listed on the website. I know at Stanford we do. But yes, it's like early action, it's non-binding, it's an early review period. But you have until May 1st if you were to be admitted under restricted early action to let us know whether or not you want to attend our university. So oftentimes there are 3 key decisions that can happen in early. I'll speak to Stanford in particular because there are some schools who only give you 2, either admit or defer. So schools that do that, they'll either admit you or they'll defer everyone else, regardless of what they feel their strength is for the general pool, and give you a final decision later. At Stanford, our philosophy on restricted early action is really, we want to give as many students their decision as possible as we can. And so students are typically going to get either an admission decision or their application could be denied at that time. We defer very few of our applicants, less than 10%. We're deferred this past year and the year prior because we really are trying to give you a decision. You've come to us early, you want to know, can I end my college search now? Do I need to keep going? What are my options going to be? And so we strive to do that as much as possible. Some universities will only admit students or defer them, and so the student has to wait. So you definitely, just look that up for the student to know or be aware of if they're undergoing that process. So early decision. Who knows what early decision is?
It's like the binding version of early action?
Yes, wonderful. So it is the binding version of early action. It's an early admission program, again, sooner than the regular dates. But if you are admitted during early decision, you are saying, I'm committing to this school. I'm going to come here if you admit me. I've done my research. I know that this is the one school that I want to go to, and I want to know now, before the end of my first semester of senior year, whether or not you're going to admit me and be done with my college search. So obviously, if a student is applying early decision to an institution, they can't apply to another early program, because if they're admitted to both, they'd be in conflict, right? Because early decision, you're saying, I'm coming here for sure, I'm committing to you. So if you got an early action somewhere else, you could potentially lose both. And if a student applies early decision somewhere and gets in, they're supposed to withdraw their application from every other university that they may have already started applying to, because they're supposed to be committed to that institution. We have had instances where students have applied early decision somewhere else, applied restricted early action to us, got into both, and eventually lost both admissions because the agreements are in conflict. The contract that students sign at the end of our applications detail out the restrictions. And if you're applying early, you're saying, I am in line with your expectations and in line with your policies on applying. So that's a conflict of interest, because early decision is binding. We say restricted early action, or I'm supposed to apply to anyone else early unless it falls within one of those exceptions. So that's why understanding the different decision plans are very important for students. You don't want to have them in a situation where they could potentially jeopardize two great decisions or two great options because they didn't follow the rules, didn't follow our guidelines on applying. And then finally, regular decision. Anyone? What is regular decision? Come on. Speak up. You're all smart. I know you know this.
It's the normal one.
Thank you. Very good. It's the normal one, yes. Regular decision. There are no restrictions. There are no binding, non-binding. Students apply later. For Stanford, our regular decision deadline is January 1st. They find out by May 1st. And they have until, they find out April 1st. And they have until May 1st to let us know whether or not they want to attend if they are admitted. And enrolling admissions is just, you apply as you go. So they will admit students on a rolling basis until they fill their classes. So you typically applying earlier to rolling decision is helpful because they'll just continue admitting new students until their class is full. So those are the different decision plans are also highlighted in your packets, but definitely keep all of those in mind. It can get confusing. Excel it out, map it out so the student knows what they're doing. So lastly, financial aid, paying for your college education, very important. So the FAFSA, what does FAFSA stand for? Yeah, money. Good answer. Yes, so the FAFSA, free application for student federal aid. Every institution is going to ask the student to fill out their FAFSA application if they're applying for financial aid. Definitely make sure that the student looks into the priority filing deadlines. Some institutions, such as Stanford, we have programs that we use the financial aid package for, so things such as travel grant programs that we use once a student's admitted to help determine if they're eligible. If they don't fill them out for us so that we have that available, if we do admit them, then they won't necessarily qualify. So they definitely want to look at what the deadlines are. Deadlines for financial aid are often a couple months after the actual application. I believe Stanford's priority filing deadline is February 1st, so that ensures that if they are admitted, that we'll also have their financial aid package available at the same time. They'll get that information together rather than having a delay. So it's important that students look at those deadlines as well, fill out the information as necessary. You know, it's the same for everyone, so it gets to be sent to all the schools that they're applying to. So the CSS profile, does anyone know what that one is?
Yeah, so, where estimated fairly institution, isn't it like community college or what?
Yes. So the CSS profile, I believe it's College Search Scholarship is what it stands for. But it's through the College Board, and this is what typically private universities will use to help allocate the endowment or institutional funds that they have available to students. So the FAFSA helps with the federal aid that colleges have at their disposal in order to award students, and the CSS profile helps to allocate the institutional funds that are not federally granted. So at Stanford, you have to fill out both in order to get your financial aid award packages. Sometimes students get confused with this and they only fill out the FAFSA, and so their financial aid application is incomplete. So it's important when looking at financial aid applications and looking at what is needed for an institution to award financial aid that the student clarifies whether or not one or both, or maybe there's a different form that a school might require that the student will need to submit. So there is a fee associated with the CSS profile. I believe it's $18 per application or an initial filing fee, but there are waivers. So oftentimes with the college admission process, anything that has a fee has a waiver. So the application fee, there's a waiver. The SAT, ACT testing fees, there are waivers. CSS profile, there is a waiver. So if that becomes a difficulty for a student, there are options and ways to submit all this information to get it all to the institution without necessarily having to pay for it, because it can add up over time if you're applying to a lot of colleges. So all universities are required now by law to have a financial aid calculator. This is a calculator that students or families can go to, insert some of their financial aid information, get an idea of what their financial aid package can look like. And some schools do tend to hide this away or tuck it away, and it's not easily found. So you'll just have to Google it, search it on the website for any particular institution. And all these calculators are going to be school specific. So every school uses a different formula, uses different calculations. So in looking at each school, it'll be important to visit their different websites if possible to really get a good idea of what your financial aid award would look like. Oftentimes we get calls saying, oh, I visited your financial aid calculator and it's telling me that you're not going to give me anything, but they actually didn't use Stanford specific calculator. They're using some sort of random calculator that they found and calling us and saying that this is bad. Even though we have benchmarks and different formulas that we're using, and many students aren't financial aid here, so it's definitely important to visit that. And then scholarship searches. There's more information, links to resources in your package, but really the key thing is never pay for a scholarship search. If you are trying to help a student find scholarships, other external sources to pay for college, and they're asking for money, don't do it. There are a number of free resources. Scholarship applications are free, and so just be wary of that. It's probably a scam. And then I just highlighted different programs: Gates and Millennium Scholars, Ron Brown, Coca-Cola Foundation, FastWeb.com, all very reputable, very helpful, beneficial websites in order to find money. So I know you're all burning up. Any questions for me? All right, well, hopefully this was helpful. Go out and mentor, be awesome. Thank you guys for your attention.